A millionaire finds a desperate mother in the pouring rain with 2 babies. When he helps her, he discovers a secret that leaves him paralyzed. What happens next will shock you even more. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to our channel to follow more incredible stories, and don't forget to smash that like button if you want to see what happens next. Rain pummeled the cobblestone streets of Havenbrook, forming small rivers that rushed towards storm drains in violent torrents. Gareth Blackwood watched the deluge from inside his silver Bentley fingers, drumming impatiently against the leather steering wheel. The wipers struggled against the relentless downpour, creating momentary windows of clarity before the glass was once again engulfed by water. "We'll need to take the long way around, sir," his driver Morris announced. "The main road is flooded." Gareth nodded, his attention suddenly drawn to 3 huddled figures on the sidewalk ahead. A woman and 2 small children drenched to the bone. The woman held a threadbare jacket over the children's heads, a futile attempt to shield them from the merciless elements. Her dark hair clung to her face in wet tendrils, and even from a distance Gareth could see her shoulders trembling. "Stop the car," Gareth said the command, leaving his lips before his mind had fully processed the decision. Morris slowed the vehicle. "Sir, I said stop the car." Gareth's voice carried an unfamiliar urgency even to his own ears. As the Bentley eased to the curb, Gareth lowered his window. The woman glanced up, her eyes wide with a mixture of wariness and desperation. The children, a boy no older than 6 and a girl perhaps 4, huddled against her legs, their small faces pale and drawn. "You need shelter," Gareth called out over the rain. It wasn't a question. The woman tightened her grip on her children. "We're fine," she replied, but her voice betrayed her. "Please," Gareth said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his tone. "I have a home just outside town. Dry clothes, warm food." He hesitated, sensing her distrust. No strings attached. She studied him with penetrating green eyes, as if trying to dissect his intentions. The little girl coughed, a wet, rattling sound. That seemed to make the decision for her mother. "Come on then," Gareth said, opening the car door. "Let me help." The woman hesitated for one more moment, looking down at her children's soaked forms, then back at Gareth's extended hand. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust exactly, but a reluctant acknowledgement of necessity. "Okay," she finally said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Just for tonight." She ushered her children toward the car, and Gareth moved over to make room. As they settled into the leather seats, water pooling beneath them, he noticed how the woman positioned herself between him and her children, her body a physical barrier of protection. "I'm Gareth Blackwood," he offered. "Maeve," she replied after a pause, offering nothing more. As Morris pulled away from the curb, Gareth caught the woman's reflection in the window, her jaw set with determination, her eyes alert and calculating. She was clearly accustomed to fighting battles, though what kind he couldn't yet tell. What Gareth didn't realize, as the Bentley glided through the rain-soaked streets toward his family estate, was that he had just invited into his home the one person with the power to dismantle everything he had inherited. And somewhere deep inside, perhaps that was exactly what he had been waiting for. The Blackwood estate loomed against the stormy sky like a monument to old money, its Gothic spires and weathered stone facade illuminated by flashes of lightning. Maeve stared through the rain-streaked window as Morris guided the car up the long, winding driveway. Her fingers tightened around her children's shoulders. "It's big," whispered her son Noah, his eyes wide with wonder. Maeve said nothing, but Gareth noticed her shoulders stiffen as they approached the mansion. She was like a cornered animal, alert to every potential danger. "It's just a house," Gareth said softly. "Too big for one person, really." Maeve's eyes snapped to his. "You live here, alone." "Just me and a small staff," he smiled, attempting to ease the tension. "The house has been in my family for generations, but most of them are gone now." The car rolled to a stop beneath a covered portico, and Morris hurried around to open the door. Rain continued to pour beyond the shelter, making the warm light spilling from the mansion's windows appear all the more inviting. Inside, the foyer stretched upward to a domed ceiling, a grand staircase curving elegantly to the 2nd floor. Maeve and her children stood huddled on the marble floor, creating puddles beneath their feet. "Mrs. Sullivan," Gareth called, and an older woman with steel-grey hair appeared almost instantly. "Oh my!" Mrs. Sullivan exclaimed, taking in the dripping visitors. "You poor dears are soaked to the bone." "Please prepare the East Wing guest rooms," Gareth instructed, "and find some dry clothes. For all of them." Mrs. Sullivan nodded efficiently and disappeared. "The East Wing has the best view of the gardens," Gareth explained, "though you can't see much in this weather." Maeve's daughter Emmy sneezed loudly, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. "Let's get you warm," Gareth said, gesturing toward a door off the main hallway. "The library has a fireplace." The library was a cocoon of dark wood and leather, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and deep armchairs arranged before a massive stone fireplace. At Gareth's instruction, a maid quickly brought towels and lit the fire, as warmth began to fill the room. Gareth noticed how Maeve kept herself between the door and her children, her eyes constantly scanning the room as if mapping escape routes. She accepted a towel with a murmured thanks, but didn't relax her vigilance. "I'll have dinner brought." "Here," Gareth said, "you must be hungry." "Why are you doing this?" Maeve finally asked, her voice low enough that her children, now huddled by the fire, couldn't hear. Gareth considered her question. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure." Something in his candor seemed to catch her off guard. For a brief moment, her guard lowered, and he glimpsed vulnerability beneath her defensive exterior. "Well, thank you," she said stiffly, "but we'll be gone in the morning." Gareth nodded, though a strange disappointment settled in his chest. "Of course, whatever you wish." Later, as they ate a simple meal of soup and bread, Gareth observed the small family. The children had begun to thaw both literally and figuratively, with Noah asking tentative questions about the books on the shelves and Emmy staring openly at the ornate ceiling. Maeve, however, remained poised on the edge of her seat, eating quickly, but carefully. Someone accustomed to having meals that could be interrupted at any moment. What was she running from, or perhaps running to? The question nagged at him as he bid them good night and watched Mrs. Sullivan lead them to their rooms. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. As Gareth retired to his study, rain still battering the windows, he found himself thinking of the careful way Maeve had wiped her children's faces with a napkin, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes when they moved beyond her reach. He had seen that look somewhere before, in old photographs of his mother before illness had claimed her. He picked up the phone, his finger hovering over the speed dial for a moment before pressing it. "Leander, it's Gareth. I need your help with something." He paused, glancing toward the East Wing. "I need you to find information on a woman named Maeve. No last name, but she has 2 children, Noah and Emmy." As he hung up, lightning flashed again, illuminating the family portrait above his desk, his father's stern face seeming to judge him from beyond the grave. Something told Gareth that his impulsive decision to bring this woman into his home would set in motion events he couldn't predict or control, and for the first time in years, that didn't feel like a bad thing. Morning arrived with surprising clarity after the previous night's tempest. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across polished floors that had known little foot traffic in recent years. Gareth woke earlier than usual, a strange anticipation, drawing him from sleep. The house felt different, as if it had been holding its breath for years and had finally exhaled. He was halfway through his first cup of coffee in the breakfast room when he heard it, laughter. The sound was so foreign in the cavernous mansion that he nearly didn't recognize it. Setting down his cup, he followed the delighted giggles to their source. In the grand hallway, Emmy was sliding in her socks across the marble floor, arms outstretched like wings, while Noah counted how far she could go. Their hair was still damp from morning baths, and they wore clothes clearly borrowed. From storage, a bit too large but clean and warm. 7 meters, Noah announced proudly as Emmy came to a stop. "That's your best one yet." "My turn again," she insisted, dark curls bouncing as she ran back to the starting point. Gareth remained in the doorway unnoticed. Something warm and unfamiliar expanded in his chest as he watched them. The Blackwood mansion had been many things over the years, imposing, impressive, intimidating, but playful had never been one of them. Not even when he was a child. "They shouldn't be running in the house," came Maeve's voice from behind him, low and concerned. Gareth turned to find her standing in the shadow of the staircase, already dressed in her own clothes, now clean and dry but visibly worn. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. "I don't mind," Gareth said, genuinely meaning it. "The place could use some life." Maeve's eyes narrowed slightly, studying him as if recalibrating her assessment. "We'll be leaving after breakfast. I appreciate your kindness, but we've imposed enough." "Where will you go?" The question slipped out before Gareth could stop it. A flash of something, panic resignation, crossed Maeve's features before she composed herself. "We'll manage." "The storm caused significant flooding downtown," Gareth said carefully. "I heard on the morning news that the shelter is at capacity." Maeve's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We'll find somewhere." Before Gareth could respond, Mrs. Sullivan appeared with a tray of freshly baked scones. The children abandoned their sliding game, drawn by the aroma of warm pastry. "Perhaps," Gareth suggested as they all moved toward the breakfast room, "you might consider staying a few more days, just until the flooding subsides." Maeve began to shake her head, but Noah looked up at her with hopeful eyes. "Can we, Mom, just for a little while? Emmy still has a cough." As if on cue, Emmy punctuated his statement with a small rattling cough that seemed to echo in the hallway. Gareth watched conflicting emotions war across Maeve's face, maternal concern versus what appeared to be deeply ingrained caution. 2 more days, she finally conceded, though her tone suggested this was an accommodation made solely for her children's benefit. She turned to Gareth, her gaze direct and unflinching. "But I insist on earning our keep. I can help with housework, cooking, whatever you need." "That's not necessary," Gareth began, but the set of Maeve's jaw told him this wasn't negotiable. "I don't accept charity," she said firmly. "Never have." Something about her pride, stubborn as it was, earned Gareth's respect. "Mrs. Sullivan could use help cataloguing the library," he offered. "It's been neglected for years." Satisfaction flickered in Maeve's eyes, not gratitude, but the dignity of fair exchange. She nodded, once agreement sealed. Later that morning, Gareth found himself unusually reluctant to leave for his office in the city. The mansion, typically a silent monument, he departed without a second thought, now seemed to pulse with a new energy. As he collected his briefcase, he paused by the library door, watching as Maeve carefully examined book spines, her fingers tracing the embossed titles with unexpected reverence. "You like books?" he observed. She glanced up, caught off guard. "I was studying literature before—" She stopped herself, lips pressing into a thin line. Before other priorities took precedence, Gareth wanted to ask what those priorities were, what had derailed her studies, but sensed the question would only rebuild the walls he'd glimpsed behind momentarily. "The library is yours to explore," he said instead. "Read anything that catches your interest." Something suspicious flickered in her eyes, as if she were trying to identify the trap in his generosity. "I'm here to work, Mr. Blackwood, not indulge." "Gareth," he corrected gently. "And sometimes, Maeve, the two aren't mutually exclusive." He left her there, surrounded by leather-bound volumes, her expression a complex mixture of longing and resolve. As his car pulled away from the estate, Gareth found his thoughts lingering not on the day's business agenda, but on the mystery of the woman in his library, and the strange sense that the silent rooms of his ancestral home had been waiting for, precisely the chaos and life her small family brought with them. His phone rang, breaking his reverie. Leander's name flashed on the screen. "I found something," his friend said without preamble. "About your guest. You're going to want to hear this." Gareth's grip tightened on the phone. The momentary lightness he'd felt watching the children play dissipated, replaced by a curious dread. Whatever Leander had discovered, Gareth suddenly wasn't sure he wanted to know. But some truths once sought cannot be avoided, and as the Bentley carried him toward the gleaming skyscraper bearing his family name, Gareth couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn inexorably toward a reckoning long overdue. The Blackwood Industries headquarters dominated the city skyline, 50 stories of steel and glass, a monument to generations of wealth and influence. Gareth stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor, his mind still occupied with thoughts of his unexpected houseguests rather than the day's meetings. "You're distracted," observed Leander Walsh, rising from one of the leather chairs in Gareth's office. Tall and angular, with prematurely silver hair despite being only in his late 30s, Leander had been Gareth's closest friend since boarding school and now served as the company's lead counsel. "What did you find?" Gareth asked, setting his briefcase aside. Leander's expression grew serious. "First tell me why you've taken in a complete stranger and her children. That's not like you, Gareth." Gareth moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. It was raining. They needed help. Even to his own ears, the explanation sounded insufficient. "Since when do you personally rescue people from rainstorms?" Leander pressed. "You donate millions to charities precisely so you don't have to get your hands dirty with individual sob stories." Gareth frowned. "That's unnecessarily cynical." "It's accurate," Leander countered, his tone softening. "Look, I'm concerned. This woman, Maeve, she's not just any random person in need." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on Gareth's desk. "Her full name is Maeve Donovan, and she used to work for Blackwood Industries." The revelation hit Gareth like a physical blow. Here in what capacity? She was on the factory floor at the Westridge plant 3 years ago. Gareth's mind raced. 3 years ago, he had been completing his MBA, preparing to take over the company following his father's death. The Westridge plant had been one of the company's oldest manufacturing facilities, producing industrial chemicals. His knowledge of its daily operations had been peripheral at best. "Go on," he said, sinking into his chair. Leander opened the folder. "She was fired after filing multiple complaints about safety conditions and worker treatment. According to the records, she was labeled a troublemaker by the plant manager. And my father, was he aware?" "The termination order came from the executive level," Leander confirmed, his expression grim. "It gets worse. After her dismissal, she tried to pursue legal action. The company countersued for defamation." Gareth felt ill. "On what grounds?" "They claimed she was making false statements to damage the company's reputation." Leander hesitated. "Your father had recently passed and you were not yet fully at the helm. The interim management team handled it aggressively." "How aggressively?" "They buried her in legal fees, froze her bank accounts pending litigation. She lost her apartment. Eventually, she dropped the suit when she couldn't afford to continue." Leander closed the folder. The final settlement included a non-disclosure agreement and a clause preventing her from seeking employment with any Blackwood-affiliated company. Silence filled the office as Gareth absorbed this information. Outside, clouds had gathered again, casting the room in shadow. "She doesn't know who I am," Gareth realized aloud. "Or rather, she doesn't know I'm that Blackwood." "It seems unlikely," Leander agreed. "The family name is common enough in the region, and your photo rarely appears in the press." Gareth stood abruptly, moving back to the window. "What were her complaints about at the plant?" Leander's hesitation was answer enough. "Exposure to toxic chemicals without proper protection, intimidation tactics against workers who reported injuries, falsified safety records." He paused. "The investigation was internal, Gareth. It was designed to discredit her." Rain began to fall again, droplets racing down the vast expanse of glass. Gareth watched their chaotic patterns, his mind equally turbulent. "You need to ask her to leave," Leander said quietly. "If she discovers who you are, who your family is." "What she'll discover," Gareth interrupted, "is that I'm harboring her without knowing her connection to my company." He turned to face his friend. "How would that look? The Blackwood heir, taking in a woman his company destroyed purely by coincidence." "No one would believe it was coincidence," Leander acknowledged. "They'd assume you were trying to buy her silence or manipulate her in some way." "Exactly." Gareth ran a hand through his hair. "And you know what, they'd be right not to believe it. The universe doesn't work that way. This isn't coincidence. Leander, this is... I don't know what this is." Leander studied him with growing concern. "What are you going to do?" It was a question Gareth had been asking himself since the moment he'd invited Maeve and her children into his car. The rational answer was clear: distance himself immediately, protect the company, preserve his family legacy. But something deeper, something that had perhaps been dormant inside him for years, rejected that path with surprising force. "I need to know more," Gareth said finally. "About what happened at Westridge, about what my family did to her. Gareth, this is dangerous territory. The NDA she signed, was it legal? Was it ethical?" Gareth's voice hardened. "Was what we did to her right, Leander?" The silence that followed contained its own answer. "I want all the files," Gareth said. "Everything related to Maeve Donovan, the Westridge plant, the lawsuits, all of it. On my desk by morning." Leander sighed, recognizing the set of his friend's jaw. "And in the meantime," Gareth replied, gathering his belongings, "I'm going home early." As he rode the elevator down to the lobby, Gareth's mind filled with images of Maeve. Her watchful eyes, her protective stance, the careful way she moved through the world. He had attributed her caution to some generic hardship. Now he understood. It was something much more specific, something that bore his family name. What he couldn't understand was why of all the doorsteps in the city the rain had driven her to his. The mansion was unnervingly quiet when Gareth returned that afternoon. He found Mrs. Sullivan in the kitchen preparing dinner with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "Where is everyone?" he asked, attempting a casual tone. "Miss Maeve is still in the library cataloguing." Mrs. Sullivan replied, a hint of approval in her voice. "She works harder than any assistant we've ever hired. As for the little ones, I believe they're exploring the conservatory." Gareth nodded, sliding his hands into his pockets to hide their slight tremor. The weight of what he now knew made the house feel different, as if its very walls concealed secrets he'd been blind to his entire life. He moved through the quiet hallways toward the library, pausing outside the open door. Maeve stood on a rolling ladder, reaching for books on the highest shelf. Her movements were precise and economical, a woman accustomed to physical labor. A strand of dark hair had escaped her practical knot, curling against her neck as she stretched upward. "You've made progress," Gareth observed, stepping into the room. Maeve startled slightly, turning to find him watching her. "You're back early," she noted, descending the ladder with practiced ease. "The office was stifling today." It wasn't entirely a lie. She gestured to a growing stack of leather-bound volumes on the large oak table. "Your family collected first editions. Did you know that?" Gareth approached the table, examining the books. "My grandfather was the collector. My father preferred more pragmatic pursuits." "And you?" Maeve asked, then seemed to catch herself as if remembering her position. "I'm sorry. That's not my business." "No, it's a fair question." Gareth ran, his fingers along the spine of a weathered copy of Great Expectations. "I've never given it much thought. The library was always here, like the furniture. Background rather than foreground." Maeve's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That's a shame. There are people who would give anything for access to knowledge like this." Something in her tone made Gareth look up sharply. "People like you." Her guard returned instantly, shoulders squaring. "I should check on the children." "Maeve," Gareth said, stopping her retreat, "I'd like to know more about you. Where you're from. What brought you to Havenbrook?" She studied him with renewed suspicion. "Why?" "Because you're staying in my home." "Is it so strange to be curious?" A humorless smile touched her lips. "In my experience, Mr. Blackwood, curiosity from men like you rarely comes without a price." The statement hung in the air between them, laden with meanings Gareth was only beginning to understand. Before he could respond, Noah burst into the library, Emmy trailing behind him. "Mom, Mrs. Sullivan said we can help make cookies," Noah announced, his earlier shyness apparently forgotten. Maeve's demeanor transformed instantly, warmth replacing wariness as she knelt to her son's level. "Did she now? And did you wash your hands after exploring the conservatory?" Emmy shook her head, curls bouncing. "We found orange trees, real ones growing inside." "The orangery dates back to the Victorian era," Gareth explained, watching, as Maeve gently wiped a smudge of dirt from Emmy's cheek. "My great-great-grandfather brought the trees from Spain." Noah looked up at him with undisguised fascination. "Did you play hide-and-seek in there when you were little?" The innocent question caught Gareth off guard. His childhood memories of the mansion were predominantly of silent corridors and closed doors. His father's study perpetually off-limits his mother's deteriorating health, confining her to the East Wing. "I wasn't here much as a child," he said finally. "I was sent to boarding school quite young." "What's boarding school?" Emmy asked, her small face scrunched in confusion. "It's a school where you live away from home," Maeve explained, her eyes meeting Gareth's over her daughter's head. Something flashed in her gaze, not quite sympathy but a momentary recognition perhaps of shared loneliness. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Sullivan calling the children for their promised cookie-making adventure. As they ran off, Maeve straightened, adjusting her simple blouse with dignity. "You still haven't answered my question," Gareth said quietly. "About what brought you here?" Maeve's expression closed like a book snapping shut. "Bad luck, bad choices, the usual story." "I don't think there's anything usual about you, Maeve Donovan." The color drained from her face at the sound of her full name. For a heartbeat she seemed frozen in place, then her eyes darted to the door, calculating escape routes, Gareth realized. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Since this morning." Gareth took a step toward her, then stopped when she flinched. "I know you worked for Blackwood Industries. I know you were fired after raising concerns about the Westridge plant." Maeve's laugh was bitter and brittle. "Fired. That's a sanitized way of putting it." Her eyes hardened. "Did you bring us here to threaten me, to remind me of the NDA I was forced to sign?" "No," Gareth said emphatically. "I had no idea who you were when I offered you shelter. I still don't, not really." Disbelief was written plainly across her features. "You expect me to believe that Gareth Blackwood, heir to Blackwood Industries, just happened to pick up a former employee and her children, out of the goodness of his heart?" "Yes," Gareth insisted. "That's exactly what happened." Maeve shook her head, backing toward the door. "We're leaving now." "Please wait," Gareth said, desperation coloring his tone. "I wasn't involved in what happened to you. I was still in school when your family's company destroyed my life." Maeve's voice remained low, but it trembled with fury. "When they blacklisted me from every decent job in the region, when they drained my savings with legal fees until I couldn't feed my children." Each accusation struck Gareth like a physical blow. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "Of course you didn't," Maeve replied, contempt replacing fear. "Men like you never do. You inherit wealth built on suffering and tell yourselves comforting stories about meritocracy and hard work." She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with fire in her eyes. "Do you know what I was trying to expose at Westridge chemical dumping that was poisoning the groundwater? Workers developing mysterious illnesses that the company doctors dismissed as stress. Pregnant women miscarrying at twice the national rate." Gareth felt ill. "I want to make this right." "Make it right." Maeve laughed again, the sound hollow. "You can't make it right. The damage is done." "Then why were you looking through my family's papers?" Gareth asked, his suspicion confirmed when Maeve's eyes widened slightly. "I noticed the disturbance in my father's study. You've been searching for something." For a moment Maeve seemed poised to deny it. Then she squared her shoulders, defiance replacing defense. "Evidence," she said simply. "Proof of what they did. Not just to me, but to everyone at Westridge, to the community." "Why the NDA? Some things matter more than legal documents, Mr. Blackwood," Maeve interrupted. "Some truths need to be told regardless of the consequences." Before Gareth could respond, a crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by Emmy's wail. Maternal instinct trumped confrontation. Maeve was out the door in an instant, rushing toward her daughter's cries. Gareth remained in the library, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of generations, and the growing awareness of how little he truly knew about the empire that bore his name. In the growing dusk, he moved to his father's study, noting the subtle signs of Maeve's search. A drawer, not fully closed, folders arranged in a slightly different order. What was she looking for specifically? And more importantly, what would she do if she found it? As night fell over the mansion, Gareth made a decision. If Maeve was searching for the truth, perhaps it was time he did the same. The files Leander delivered the next morning filled 3 cardboard boxes, a paper trail of corporate malfeasance that made Gareth's stomach churn. He sequestered himself in his study, poring over internal memos, redacted safety reports, and clinical data that had been deliberately misinterpreted to downplay the health impacts on Westridge workers. The most damning documents detailed the company's response to Maeve's initial complaint surveillance of her activities, a whisper campaign to discredit her among co-workers, and finally the coordinated legal assault that had left her destitute. A knock at the study door interrupted his grim reading. Mrs. Sullivan entered with a concerned expression. "Sir, Miss Maeve asked me to inform you that they'll be departing this afternoon. She's made arrangements with a women's shelter in Millfield." Gareth stood abruptly. "Where is she now?" "In the East Garden with the children. They're saying goodbye to the koi pond." Gareth found them by the water, Emmy tossing breadcrumbs while Noah watched the orange and white fish swirl beneath the surface. Maeve stood slightly apart, her face tilted toward the sun in a rare moment of unguarded peace. She sensed his presence before he spoke, her posture instantly alert. "Mrs. Sullivan says you're leaving," Gareth said, stopping a respectful distance away. "It's for the best." Maeve's tone was final. "We've imposed too long already. You haven't imposed at all. In fact," Gareth hesitated, weighing his next words carefully. "In fact, I think you should stay longer." Maeve turned to face him, fully suspicion etched in every line of her body. "Why would I do that?" Gareth glanced meaningfully at the children, who were absorbed in their fish feeding. Understanding his reluctance to speak freely in front of them, Maeve instructed Noah to take his sister to collect more bread from Mrs. Sullivan. Once they were alone, Gareth continued. "I've been reviewing the Westridge files. Your company's official version, I'm sure," Maeve said bitterly. "Actually, no." Gareth stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've obtained the internal documents, the ones that were never meant to be, seen outside the executive suite. They confirm everything you alleged, Maeve, and worse." Something flashed in her eyes, not quite hope, but a fierce validation. "I knew it." "There's something I need to know," Gareth said. "Were you looking for these documents when you searched my father's study?" Maeve's silence was confirmation enough. "Why now, after 3 years?" She looked away toward the path her children had taken. "Noah has been having breathing problems, asthma, the doctors say, but he was born healthy." Her voice tightened. "Emmy gets nosebleeds, frequent headaches." "The doctors can't explain why." Understanding dawned on Gareth. "You think it's related to chemical exposure at Westridge?" "I know it is," Maeve said firmly. "Other families from the plant are experiencing similar issues with their children, but without proof, without documentation of what chemicals we were exposed to." She shook her head. "The medical bills are crushing us, and the specialists won't even consider industrial toxicity without evidence." Gareth felt an unfamiliar emotion seize his chest, a burning mixture of shame and resolve. "I want to help you, Maeve, not out of charity, but out of justice." She studied him with wary calculation. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Stay," Gareth said simply. "Continue your search. I'll give you access to everything I have, the files, the records, all of it." Maeve's brow furrowed. "Why would you do that? It's your family's company, your inheritance." "Perhaps it's time to redefine what that inheritance means," Gareth replied, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "My father built an empire, but at what cost? If that cost includes children like Noah and Emmy suffering, then the price was too high." For the first time since they'd met, Maeve seemed to truly see him, not as a Blackwood, not as a symbol of the company that had wronged her, but as an individual making a choice. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" she asked, the wariness not entirely gone from her voice. Gareth considered the question seriously. "A chance to do what's right. A chance to be something more than just my father's son." The silence between them hummed with potential, trust being cautiously measured against years of hard-learned suspicion. 2 weeks, Maeve finally said. "We'll stay 2 weeks while I review the documents. After that, we'll reassess." Gareth nodded relief. Washing through him. "I'll have everything moved to the library for your convenience." "Mr. Blackwood," "Gareth," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be allies in this, I think first names are appropriate." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Gareth, then." You should know that if I find what I'm looking for, I intend to make it public. All of it, regardless of the consequences to your company." "I understand," Gareth said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. Some truths need to be told. As they walked back toward the house, Gareth stole a glance at Maeve's profile, the determined set of her jaw, the quiet dignity in her carriage. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his family name as something he could choose to carry differently, perhaps even honorably. What neither of them noticed was the sleek black car parked just beyond the estate's gates, or the telephoto lens capturing their conversation from a distance. By nightfall, those images would be on the desk of Victor Hargrove Blackwood Industries, interim CEO and Gareth's father's oldest friend, a man with everything to lose if the Westridge scandal ever came to light. And as Gareth led Maeve into the house, making plans to share his family's darkest secrets, the machinery of corporate self-preservation was already grinding into motion against them both. 3 days into their collaboration, the library had transformed into a war room of sorts. Documents covered every surface, arranged in chronological order, with Maeve's neat handwriting labeling each stack. She worked with methodical precision, cross-referencing dates and names, occasionally stepping back to study the timeline they were constructing along one wall. Gareth divided his time between the mansion and corporate headquarters, bringing home additional files and records that Leander reluctantly provided. He had told his friend only that he was conducting a thorough review of company practices, not that he was sharing everything with Maeve. "You've been avoiding the third-quarter strategic planning meetings," Victor Hargrove noted, appearing in Gareth's office doorway late Thursday afternoon. In his 60s, with steel-grey hair and calculating, Guy Hargrove had been Gareth's father's right-hand man for decades, before stepping in as interim CEO during Gareth's business education. "I've been focused on historical compliance issues," Gareth replied, carefully closing the folder on his desk. Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Any particular reason?" "Just due diligence, getting a complete picture of the company I'm inheriting." "Admirable," Hargrove said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him. "Though one might question the timing and the company you're keeping while conducting this review." Gareth felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Hargrove withdrew an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the desk. Inside were photographs. Gareth and Maeve in the garden walking together toward the house, her face clearly visible in several shots. "Maeve Donovan," Hargrove said the name, dropping like a stone between them. "A former employee with a rather significant grudge against this company, currently residing in your home with access to confidential corporate records, if my sources are correct." Gareth kept his expression neutral with effort. "You're having me followed." "Not you, Gareth. Her." Hargrove's voice hardened. "She's been on our watch list since the Westridge situation. We have a notification system in place for certain persons of interest." "Persons of interest," Gareth repeated, disgust coloring his tone. "She's a single mother whose children are sick because of this company's negligence." "Alleged negligence," Hargrove corrected smoothly. "Nothing was ever proven in court." "Because you bankrupted her before she could make her case." Gareth stood, anger finally breaking through his composed facade. "I've seen the internal reports. Victor, I know what happened at Westridge." A flicker of something, concern calculation, crossed Hargrove's features before his professional mask reasserted itself. "Whatever you think you know is incomplete at best. Your father made difficult decisions to protect this company, to protect your inheritance." "My inheritance," Gareth echoed hollowly. "Do you know what else I've inherited, Victor? The consequences of those decisions. Children suffering from respiratory diseases, families devastated by cancer clusters, communities with poisoned groundwater." Hargrove sighed as if disappointed by Gareth's naivety. "This is business, not charity. Every major industrial company faces similar challenges. Your father understood that progress comes with costs. Costs that always seem to be paid by others," Gareth observed bitterly. "Never by us. I didn't come here to debate corporate ethics," Hargrove said, his patience visibly thinning. "I came to warn you. The board is concerned about your recent distractions. If Ms. Donovan is influencing you to act against the company's interests—" "She's not influencing me," Gareth interrupted. "She's helping me understand the full scope of what this company has done." Hargrove's expression darkened. "Be very careful, Gareth. Your position as heir apparent is not as secure as you might believe. The board can vote to extend my interim leadership indefinitely if they feel you're not ready to take the reins." The threat hung in the air between them, its implications clear. "Is that all?" Gareth asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil. "Inside." "For now." Hargrove moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Ms. Donovan signed a very comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. If she breaches it in any way, this company will pursue all available legal remedies against her. I suggest you remind her of that fact." After Hargrove left, Gareth remained at his desk, staring at the photographs. The intrusion felt profoundly violating, not just of his privacy, but of the fragile trust he and Maeve had begun to build. He arrived home earlier than usual, tension coiled in his shoulders. The mansion was quiet except for faint piano notes drifting from the music room, a space that had remained largely unused since his mother's death. Following the sound, Gareth found Noah seated at the grand piano, his small fingers picking out a simple melody while Emmy watched entranced. "My mother taught me that song," Gareth said softly from the doorway. Noah looked up, startled but not frightened. "Mrs. Sullivan said it was okay to try the piano." "Of course it is," Gareth assured him, moving into the room. "My mother would have loved to hear it being played again." "Where is she?" Emmy asked, her innocence making the question both simple and profound. "She died when I was about your age," Gareth replied, sitting beside Noah on the piano bench. "Our dad died too." Noah confided, his voice matter-of-fact, in the way children sometimes are, about life's greatest tragedies. "Mum says he's in heaven watching over us." Gareth glanced at the boy, surprised by this new information. "I'm sorry to hear that." Noah shrugged, returning his attention to the piano keys. "I don't really remember him. Mom has pictures, though." Before Gareth could respond, Maeve appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from maternal concern to wariness when she saw Gareth with her children. "There you are," she said to Noah and Emmy. "It's time for your baths before dinner." As the children scampered off, Maeve lingered, studying Gareth with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see through all pretense. "What's wrong?" she asked directly. "We need to talk," Gareth replied, rising from the piano bench. "In private." In the library, Gareth showed her the photographs, watching as her face drained of color. "They're watching us," she whispered, hands trembling slightly as she set the pictures down. "Not us, you." Gareth took a steadying breath. "Victor Hargrove, my father's former second-in-command and the current interim CEO, paid me a visit today. He knows you're here, knows we're reviewing the Westridge documents together." Maeve's laugh held no humor. "And let me guess," he reminded, "how you of my NDA threatened legal action if I speak out." "Among other things," Gareth confirmed grimly. He also implied that my position as heir could be jeopardized if I continue to associate with you. Understanding dawned in Maeve's eyes. "So that's it then, you're backing out?" "No," Gareth said firmly. "That's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the risks, for both of us." Maeve studied him, doubt-warring with something like hope in her expression. "Why are you doing this, Gareth? Really, you stand to lose everything. Your company, your inheritance, your reputation." The question deserved an honest answer. Gareth moved to the window, watching as twilight settled over the estate grounds. "When I was a child," he began slowly, "my mother used to tell me that a family name was more than just letters on a letterhead. It was a promise, a covenant with everyone who heard it spoken." He turned back to Maeve. "My father broke that covenant. He used our name to shield corruption, to intimidate, to silence people like you who dared to speak the truth." Maeve's expression softened slightly. "And you think exposing what happened at Westridge will restore that covenant?" "I don't know," Gareth admitted, "but I know that continuing to hide it makes me complicit, and I can't live with that, not anymore." Something shifted in Maeve's demeanor, the ever-present wall of distrust briefly lowering to reveal the woman beneath. exhausted, determined, and perhaps just a little bit hopeful. "There's something you should see," she said, after a moment, moving to one of the document piles. She extracted a folder labeled Executive Communications 2021-2022 and handed it to Gareth. "Page 47. It's a memo from Hargrove to your father dated 2 weeks before I was fired." Gareth flipped to the indicated page and began to read. The memo detailed Maeve's safety complaints and recommended immediate termination before she could incite broader employee unrest. But it was the final paragraph that made Gareth's blood run cold. "Furthermore, our surveillance indicates potential involvement from investigative journalist Simon Donovan's spouse with ties to the Chronicle. Recommend comprehensive containment. Strategy to prevent media exposure." Gareth looked up, the implications dawning on him. "Simon Donovan, your husband." Maeve nodded, her expression hardening. "He was investigating industrial pollution in the river downstream from Westridge. Not because of me. He had sources inside the EPA who tipped him off about irregular test results. It was a coincidence that I started working at the plant around the same time." "What happened to him?" Gareth asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "Official cause was a single-car accident, late-night rural road, no witnesses." Maeve's voice remained steady, but her eyes betrayed old grief. "But Simon was a careful driver, always. And the night he died, he told me he was meeting a source who had documents proving Blackwood Industries had falsified environmental impact studies for over a decade." The weight of her accusation hung in the air between them. Gareth felt physically ill. "You think my father's company was responsible for his death?" He said, the words barely audible. "I don't know," Maeve replied honestly, "and I may never know. But I do know that 2 weeks after he died, I was fired, sued into silence, and left with nothing but 2 small children and a lifetime of questions." Gareth sank into a chair, the document still clutched in his hand. Every foundation he had built, his life upon, seemed to be crumbling beneath him. If Blackwood Industries, if his father, had been involved in something so monstrous. "What do you want to do?" he asked, finally looking up at Maeve. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." The declaration hung between them, a promise that crossed boundaries of class power and the complex history that had brought them to this moment. For the first time since they'd met, Maeve looked at Gareth not with suspicion or contempt, but with cautious respect. "I want the truth," she said simply. "For my children, for Simon, for all the families hurt by what happened at Westridge." Gareth nodded, a decision crystallizing within him. "Then that's what we'll get. Together." As night fell over the mansion, they remained in the library, 2 unlikely allies, planning their next move against forces more powerful and dangerous than either had fully comprehended. And somewhere in the city, Victor Hargrove was making plans of his own, plans that would test their newfound alliance to its breaking point. Rain returned to Havenbrook the following day, a persistent drizzle that mirrored the somber mood within the mansion. Gareth cancelled his meetings at Blackwood headquarters instead, joining Maeve in the library where they worked in focused silence, methodically combing through records that spanned nearly 2 decades. "Look at this," Maeve said mid-afternoon, spreading several documents across the table. "Environmental compliance reports from Westridge 2015 through 2022. Every year they show chemical levels just below the legal thresholds." Gareth examined the papers, noting the consistent pattern. "Too consistent," he murmured. Maeve nodded. "Exactly. Statistical impossibility. Real testing would show variation, some months higher, some lower. These were manufactured. But why? Maintain the charade," Gareth wondered aloud. "Why not just bribe officials to look the other way completely?" "Paper trail," Maeve explained. "If something went catastrophically wrong, a major spill, a cluster of deaths that couldn't be ignored, they'd need documentation showing they'd been compliant all along." Gareth shook his head, disgust mingling with a dawning comprehension of the systematic corruption embedded in his family's company. "My father built this empire on lies." "Not just lies," Maeve corrected, her voice softening unexpectedly. "Fear." Gareth looked up, questioning. "I've been thinking about that memo," Maeve continued. "The one about Simon. It wasn't just about silencing critics," It was about fear. Fear that if one truth came to light, it would unravel everything. She hesitated, then added, "Your father was afraid, Gareth." The observation struck him with surprising force. He had never associated fear with Charles Blackwood, a man who had ruled his company and his family with iron certainty. But looking at the elaborate architecture of deception documented before them, Gareth recognized the desperate measures of someone terrified of exposure. "I need to show you something," Gareth said suddenly, rising from the table. "Something I haven't looked at in years." He led Maeve through corridors rarely used to the mansion's west wing. Unlike the meticulously maintained public spaces, this section bore signs of prolonged neglect. Dust covers draped over furniture wallpaper faded. Thin, uneven patches, where sunlight had crept through partially closed curtains. "My father's private study," Gareth explained, producing an old-fashioned key from his pocket. Not the office downstairs where he conducted business, but where he worked when he wanted absolute privacy. The room beyond the locked door was frozen. In time, a leather chair worn smooth by years of use, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes on business and law, a massive oak desk positioned to command the space. The air held the lingering ghosts of cigar smoke and woody cologne. "I haven't been in here since the funeral," Gareth admitted, moving to the desk with reverent steps. "I couldn't bear to dismantle it, but I couldn't bring myself to use it either." Maeve remained by the door, sensing the sacred nature of this intrusion. "What are we looking for?" "I'm not sure," Gareth confessed, running his fingers along the edge of the desk. "But my father kept his most sensitive documents here, not at the office. Things he didn't trust to corporate servers or executive assistants." He began methodically searching the desk drawers, most of which contained only the mundane detritus of business life: fountain pens, notepads, paper clips. But when he reached the bottom right drawer, he found it locked. "There's a key," Gareth murmured, more to himself than to Maeve. He always wore it on his watch chain. "Where is the watch now?" Maeve asked, stepping carefully into the room. "In my safe. He left it to me, in his will." Gareth looked up, a new urgency in his movements. "Wait here." When he returned minutes later with the antique pocket watch, Maeve had moved to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. She turned as he entered, something careful in her expression. "Your father built quite a legacy," she observed, gesturing to the grounds stretching beyond the glass. "A legacy built on suffering," Gareth replied bitterly, detaching a small key from the watch chain. "Yes," Maeve agreed, her voice unexpectedly gentle. "But legacies can be rewritten, Gareth. That's what you're doing now." Their eyes met across the room, a moment of understanding that transcended the circumstances of their unlikely partnership. Then Gareth turned his attention to the locked drawer, inserting the tiny key with a decisive click. Inside lay a single leather portfolio, unmarked, except for the embossed Blackwood family crest. Gareth lifted it reverently, placing it on the desk's polished surface. "Whatever we find in here," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I'm prepared for the consequences, for the company, for my family name, for all of it." Maeve moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender of the soap Mrs. Sullivan had provided for the guest rooms. "Are you sure this is your heritage?" "My heritage is what I choose it to be," Gareth replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Not what my father dictated it should be." With deliberate movements, he unbound the portfolio and spread its contents across the desk. Inside were documents unlike any they had reviewed thus far. Not corporate communications or official reports, but personal notes in Charles Blackwood's distinctive handwriting, along with photographs, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be private investigator reports spanning more than 30 years. "Oh my God," Maeve whispered, lifting a photograph that showed a young couple standing with protest signs outside a factory gate. The woman's face, though decades younger, was unmistakable. "That's my mother." Gareth stared in disbelief. "Your mother worked for Blackwood?" "No," Maeve replied, her voice distant with memory. "She was an environmental activist in the 70s. She led protests against industrial pollution in the river valley." She looked up at Gareth, her eyes wide with realization. "So, your father was tracking my family long before I ever applied at Westridge." They dove into the documents, with renewed urgency, constructing a narrative more disturbing than either had anticipated. Charles Blackwood had maintained surveillance on multiple generations of families he considered threats to his business interests. Activists, journalists, even politicians who had questioned Blackwood Industries' practices. It was systematic, Gareth said hollowly, staring at a list of names that included Simon Donovan, marked with a date that matched his death. He tracked anyone who might expose what was happening at his plants, then neutralized them one way or another. Not just at the plants, Maeve corrected, holding up a faded newspaper clipping about contaminated drinking water in a town 40 miles from Havenbrook. Your father's company poisoned entire communities, Gareth. The weight of this legacy settled over Gareth like a physical burden. He sank into his father's chair, surrounded by evidence of decades of calculated harm. How could he live with himself? The same way most people justify their worst actions, Maeve said quietly, by convincing himself it was necessary. For the company, for the family, for you. Gareth looked up sharply. Don't absolve him by suggesting this was done for my benefit. I'm not absolving him, Maeve replied, her tone firm but not unkind. I'm helping you understand. Men like your father don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as pragmatists making hard choices that others are too weak to make. The insight struck Gareth with unexpected force, not because it excused his father's actions, but because it illuminated the twisted logic that had guided them. Charles Blackwood had not been a cartoon villain twirling his moustache as he poisoned rivers. He had been a man who believed that ends justified means that his vision for his company trumped individual suffering. We have what we need, Maeve said, gathering the most damning documents. More than enough to take to the authorities, to the press. No, Gareth said suddenly, a new clarity emerging from his moral horror. We need more than exposure. We need a reckoning. Maeve studied him with cautious hope. What are you suggesting? A complete dismantling of the corrupt systems my father built, Gareth said, rising from the chair with newfound resolve. Not just public exposure, but real justice, compensation for victims, structural reforms, criminal charges where warranted. The board will fight you every step of the way, Maeve warned. Hargrove will do everything in his power to protect himself and your father's legacy. Let them try, Gareth replied, a steely determination hardening his features. This isn't just about making amends anymore, Maeve. This is about redefining what the Blackwood name stands for. As they carefully gathered the evidence, thunder rolled in the distance, nature's punctuation to the seismic shift occurring within the mansion's walls. By unspoken agreement, they returned to the library, where Noah and Emmy had been left in Mrs. Sullivan's care, drawing pictures at a small table near the fireplace. The domestic scene, children creating bright artwork amid the gathering storm, struck Gareth with poignant force. This was what truly mattered, not corporate empires or family legacies, but the future these children and countless others would inherit. Mom, look, Emmy called, holding up a crayon drawing. I made our new home. Maeve crossed to her daughter, examining the colorful depiction of the Blackwood mansion, with stick figures standing in front. It's beautiful, sweetheart, but remember, this isn't our home. We're just visiting. Emmy's face fell slightly. But I like it here. Noah has a piano and Mrs. Sullivan makes cookies, and Mr. Gareth doesn't yell like the landlords did. The innocent observation pierced Gareth's heart. How many homes had these children been forced from? How many times had their mother had to explain that they couldn't stay, couldn't put down roots, couldn't feel safe? Emmy, he said gently, kneeling beside the little girl. Would you like to help me with something important? Her eyes brightened. What kind of important? I need to make this house happier, Gareth explained. It's been sad for a long time. Do you think your pictures might help? Emmy nodded solemnly. Pictures always make sad things better? Mom says so. Then it's settled, Gareth declared, rising to meet Maeve's questioning gaze. Emmy will brighten the house with her art, while you and I change the world. A smile tugged at the corner of Maeve's mouth, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. Ambitious plans for a rainy afternoon. We'll start small, Gareth replied, matching her light tone despite the gravity of their discoveries. Just Toppling a corrupt corporate empire today, we can tackle world peace tomorrow. As the children returned to their drawing, Gareth and Maeve moved to the library's far corner, spreading their newfound evidence across a fresh table. We need a strategy, Maeve said, her practical nature asserting itself, a careful approach that can't be dismissed or buried. Gareth nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. We start with Leander. With the right legal guidance, we can structure this to maximize impact while minimizing the chance for corporate counterattacks. Can you trust him? Maeve asked the old, wariness returning to her voice. He works for the company. He works for me, Gareth corrected, and more importantly, he has a conscience. He's been uncomfortable with the company's practices for years, but felt powerless to change them. As they bent their heads together, formulating a plan that would shake Blackwood Industries to its foundation, neither noticed Morris enter the library until he cleared his throat discreetly. "Pardon the interruption, sir," the driver said, "but there's someone at the gate insisting on seeing you, a Mr. Hargrove. He says it's urgent." Gareth and Maeve exchanged alarmed glances. How did he know I was home? Gareth wondered aloud, then answered his own question. He's having the house watched, not just you. What do we do? Maeve asked, glancing meaningfully at the incriminating documents spread across the table. Gareth's mind raced through scenarios, calculations, risks. We hide nothing, he decided firmly. It's time to confront this head-on. As Morris left to admit the unwelcome visitor, Gareth turned to Maeve with unexpected intensity. Whatever happens, next remember this, I'm with you, all the way. The simple declaration hung between them, a promise that transcended their complicated history and uncertain future. And as the sound of a car engine grew louder on the driveway, heralding Victor, Hargrove's arrival, Maeve did something that surprised them both. She reached out and squeezed Gareth's hand, a brief but unmistakable gesture of solidarity. All the way, she echoed softly. In that moment, facing an imminent confrontation with the architect of so much suffering, they were no longer unlikely, allies bound by circumstance. They were partners united by a shared vision of justice, and perhaps something more that neither was ready to name. Victor Hargrove stood in the mansion's entrance hall, like an invading general flanked by two men whose expensive suits couldn't quite disguise their security training. Rain dripped from his umbrella onto the marble floor, each droplet a small violation of the home's sanctity. "Gareth," he greeted with forced cordiality, "I was concerned when you missed today's board committee meetings. It's not like you to be unavailable." "I had more pressing matters to attend to," Gareth replied, evenly aware of Maeve watching from the library doorway. "What brings you here, Victor?" Hargrove's gaze slid past Gareth, fixing on Maeve with calculated assessment. "I think you know. May we speak privately?" "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Ms. Donovan." Gareth stated the formal address, a subtle signal to Maeve that they were now operating in the realm of strategy, not emotion. Hargrove's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Very well. I've come to inform you that the board has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. Your activities have raised serious concerns about your readiness to assume leadership." "My activities?" Gareth echoed with deliberate innocence. "You mean my review of company records? My interest in our corporate history? I wasn't aware that due diligence was cause for concern." "Don't play naive, Gareth. It doesn't suit you." Hargrove's voice hardened. "You've been accessing restricted files, removing documents from secure storage, consorting with a known antagonist of the company." He gestured dismissively toward Maeve. "The board questions your judgment, your loyalty." "Loyalty," Gareth repeated the word, bitter on his tongue. "Interesting choice. Tell me, Victor, where was your loyalty when my father was authorizing illegal chemical dumping, when he was falsifying safety reports, when employees who spoke up mysteriously lost their jobs, their savings, sometimes even their lives?" Hargrove's expression didn't change, but a muscle twitched near his temple, the only visible sign that Gareth's words had struck a nerve. "Your father built an empire that employed thousands, supported entire communities. He made difficult decisions that allowed the company to thrive in competitive markets. He broke the law," Gareth stated flatly. "He poisoned people, children, and you helped him cover it up." A heavy silence filled the hall, broken only by the distant sound of Noah playing scales on the piano, an incongruously innocent counterpoint to the confrontation unfolding below. "This conversation is pointless," Hargrove finally said, his composure carefully restored. "The board meeting is at 9 tomorrow. I suggest you come prepared to demonstrate why you should remain the presumptive heir to your father's position." His gaze shifted to Maeve. "Without distractions." "I'll be there," Gareth assured him. "With a presentation I think will interest everyone greatly." Something in Gareth's tone must have alerted Hargrove to the depth of his discovery. The older man's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Gareth, think very carefully about your next move. Some paths once taken cannot be retraced." "A lesson my father should have considered," Gareth replied evenly. After Hargrove and his entourage departed, Gareth remained in the hallway staring at the closed door as if it might provide answers to the challenges that lay ahead. "He's afraid," Maeve observed, moving to stand beside him. Gareth nodded. "He knows we've found something. He just doesn't know what exactly." "What will you do at the board meeting?" Maeve asked, concern evident in her voice. "They could remove you completely." "They'll try," Gareth agreed, "which is why we need to move faster than we planned." He turned to face her fully. "I'm going to call Leander, tonight. We need to prepare a complete presentation of everything we've discovered." Maeve hesitated. "Are you sure that's wise once you show your hand?" "We don't have the luxury of caution anymore," Gareth interrupted gently. "Hargrove is already mobilizing. If we wait, he'll find a way to neutralize us, just like he did with you 3 years. I'll go." The practical truth of this assessment seemed to convince Maeve. She nodded once decision made. "Then we work through the night. We organize everything, create backups, prepare for every possible countermove." As they returned to the library, a new urgency driving their steps, Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway of the children's temporary bedroom, concern etched on her face. "Miss Maeve," she called softly. "Emmy's fever has returned. She's asking for you." Maeve's transformation was immediate. Corporate conspiracies and historic injustices instantly secondary to her child's needs. "I'll be right there." "Go," Gareth urged. "I'll start sorting the documents and call Leander." "But there's so much to do." "Your daughter needs you," Gareth said firmly. "The documents will wait." As Maeve hurried away, Gareth turned his attention to the scattered evidence of his father's crimes. The task ahead was monumental. Not just organizing the physical evidence, but preparing for the psychological and political battle that would unfold in the boardroom. He was halfway through sorting the most damning documents when Leander arrived, rain-soaked and visibly anxious. "This better be important," the attorney said, shaking water from his coat. "I had to cancel dinner with the governor's chief of staff." "It's important," Gareth confirmed, leading him to the library, "and it changes everything." For the next hour, Gareth outlined their discoveries, while Leander reviewed the evidence with increasing dismay. The attorney's professional composure cracked when he reached the surveillance reports on Simon Donovan. "My God," Leander whispered, looking up with haunted eyes. Did the company have something to do with his death?" "I don't know for certain," Gareth admitted. "But the timing, the circumstances, it's difficult to see it as coincidence." Leander set the document down as if it might burn his fingers. "Gareth, this is beyond corporate malfeasance. This is potentially criminal conspiracy. Wrongful death. If these documents became public—" "When," Gareth corrected. "When they become public." Leander stared at his friend and client with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You understand what that means for the company, for your inheritance." "I do," Gareth said simply. Before Leander could respond, Maeve appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with worry. "Emmy's fever is worse. She needs a doctor." Gareth rose immediately. "I'll call Dr. Whitman. He can be here within 30 minutes. "No," Maeve said firmly. "No private doctors. She needs a hospital proper tests." She hesitated, vulnerability, briefly replacing her usual self-sufficiency. "Her symptoms, they're similar to what other Westridge children experienced. I need to know what we're dealing with." The implication hung heavily in the air. Emmy's illness might not be a simple childhood fever, but something far more sinister. a delayed consequence of environmental toxins from the Blackwood factory. "I'll take you," Gareth decided instantly. "Morris can have the car ready in 5 minutes." "What about the board meeting preparation?" Leander asked, gesturing to the documents spread across the library tables. "It will have to wait," Gareth replied, his priorities suddenly crystal clear. A child's health comes first. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Noah, sleepy-eyed but insistent on accompanying them, Emmy wrapped in blankets despite the warm May evening, Leander pulled Gareth aside. "The timing is suspicious," he murmured. "Hargrove visits, then suddenly the child is ill enough to require hospitalization. Drawing you away from the mansion, away from these documents on the eve of the board meeting?" The suggestion sent a chill through Gareth. "You think Emmy's illness could be manufactured somehow?" Leander shrugged. "I think Hargrove has demonstrated he'll go to extraordinary lengths to protect the company. Just be careful. Don't leave these documents unattended." Decision. Maid Gareth quickly gathered the most crucial evidence into his father's leather portfolio. "They'll come with us. We'll continue working at the hospital if necessary." The rain had intensified again, drumming against the Bentley's roof as Morris navigated the winding roads toward Havenbrook Memorial. In the back seat, Maeve cradled Emmy, whose small face was flushed with fever. Noah pressed against his mother's side, unusually quiet, his earlier exuberance replaced by solemn concern for his sister. Gareth watched them, this small family bound together by love and hardship, and felt something fundamental shift within his understanding of purpose and responsibility. The company, the inheritance, the Blackwood legacy, all of it seemed suddenly subordinate to the immediate human needs beside him. "She'll be all right," he said softly, meeting Maeve's worried gaze across the dimly lit interior. "I promise." It was a promise he had no right or power to make, yet Maeve nodded, accepting the comfort, if not the certainty. Something unspoken passed between them, a trust that transcended their complicated history and tenuous alliance. As the hospital's emergency entrance came into view, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights against the stormy darkness, Gareth made a silent vow. Whatever happened tomorrow in the boardroom, whatever consequences came from exposing decades of corporate wrongdoing, he would ensure that this small family, and all the families harmed by Blackwood Industries, received the justice and care they deserved, because some legacies were worth sacrificing, and others, newer, truer ones, were just beginning to take shape. The hospital waiting room was a study in muted desperation, faded upholstery, outdated magazines, the antiseptic, smell that failed to mask underlying notes of anxiety and fatigue. Gareth sat rigidly in a molded plastic chair, his tailored suit incongruous among the worn jeans and wrinkled scrubs of other late-night visitors. Across from him, Noah had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled against Maeve's side, like a much younger child. She absently stroked his hair, her gaze fixed on the swinging doors through which doctors had taken Emmy nearly 2 hours earlier. "Family of Emmy Donovan," called a tired-looking physician, clipboard in hand. Maeve rose immediately, gently repositioning Noah against the chair. Gareth stood as well, the leather portfolio clutched in his hand, like a talisman. "I'm her mother," Maeve said, her voice steady, despite the fear evident in her posture. "How is—" She, the doctor, middle-aged with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, glanced at Gareth questioningly. "A friend of the family," Gareth supplied quickly. "I can wait here if—" "No," Maeve interrupted, surprising them both. "He should hear this too." They followed the doctor to a small consultation room, leaving Noah sleeping under the watchful eye of a sympathetic nurse. Inside, the doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. Chen, arranged his notes with methodical precision. "Emmy's immediate condition is stable," he began. "We've brought the fever down and started her on broad-spectrum antibiotics as a precaution, but—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Her blood work shows some concerning abnormalities. Elevated liver enzymes, unusual white blood cell patterns. Has she been exposed to any industrial chemicals or toxins that you're aware of?" Maeve's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of her chair. "Yes, potentially. I worked at the Westridge chemical plant 3 years ago. Emmy was often in the on-site daycare facility." Dr. Chen's expression shifted subtly, Recognition followed by carefully masked concern. I see. We've had several cases from families connected to that facility. Similar presentations. What are you saying? Maeve asked, though the dread in her voice suggested she already knew. I'm saying we need to run more specialized tests, Dr. Chen replied gently. And I'm saying you're not the only parent sitting in a hospital room tonight because of what happened at Westridge. The simple confirmation, clinical and detached, hit Gareth with physical force. Until this moment, the damage caused by Blackwood Industries had been theoretical, documented in reports and statistics. Now it had a face. Emmy's feverish cheeks, Noah's worried eyes, Maeve's hands trembling, despite her determined composure. How many? Gareth asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Chen hesitated, professional discretion warring with moral obligation. At least 20 children in our pediatric department alone have presented with unusual symptoms consistent with industrial chemical exposure. 3 have developed rare blood disorders. 2 have kidney function impairment. Maeve made a small, involuntary sound, part gasp, part stifled sob. Without thinking, Gareth reached across the space between them, covering her hand with his own. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. What can be done? Gareth asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. For Emmy specifically, we'll keep her overnight for observation and additional testing. Beyond that, treatment depends on the exact nature of the exposure and resulting conditions. Dr. Chen's professional demeanor softened slightly. The truth is, we're still learning how these chemical compounds affect developing systems long-term. Research is ongoing. Research requires funding, Gareth noted. Specialized treatment requires insurance coverage most of these families probably don't have. Dr. Chen's expression confirmed the unspoken reality. Medical resources are limited, especially for conditions without clear diagnostic codes or established treatment protocols. That will change, Gareth said with quiet certainty, starting tomorrow. After Dr. Chen left to check on Emmy, Maeve turned to Gareth, confusion mingling with the worry on her face. What did you mean, starting tomorrow? Gareth opened the leather portfolio, spreading key documents across the small consultation table. We've been focusing on exposing what happened at Westridge, but that's only part of the solution. These families, these children, need more than justice. They need care, treatment, resources. Understanding dawned in Maeve's eyes. You're talking about compensation, medical funds. I'm talking about complete remediation, Gareth clarified. Environmental cleanup, health monitoring programs, a dedicated treatment facility specializing in chemical exposure cases, fully funded by Blackwood Industries. He tapped one of the documents, a financial statement showing company reserves. The money exists. It's been earmarked for litigation contingencies, essentially a war chest to fight lawsuits like the one you tried to bring. Maeve's expression hardened. The board will never approve reallocating those funds. They won't have a choice, Gareth replied, extracting a document with the corporate seal. When my father died, he left controlling interest in the company to me. I haven't exercised that control because I believed in collaborative governance. His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. I was naive. So tomorrow at the board meeting, tomorrow, Gareth continued, his resolve strengthening with each word, I don't just present evidence of past wrongdoing. I announce a complete corporate restructuring, new leadership, new priorities, new ethical standards, enforced by binding, legal commitments and independent oversight. The audacity of the plan hung in the air between them. Maeve studied Gareth with an unreadable expression, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Why are you doing this? She asked finally. Really, you could have buried these documents, fired Hargrove to appease your conscience, made some symbolic donations to environmental causes. Why risk everything? It was a fair question, one Gareth had been asking himself since the moment he'd invited a rain-soaked stranger and her children into his car. The answer, when it came, surprised him with its simple truth. Because I can't be the man my father wanted me to be, he said quietly, and I'm tired of trying. Before Maeve could respond, a nurse appeared to inform them that Emmy was settled in a pediatric room and asking for her mother. As Maeve rose to follow, she paused, turning back to Gareth with unexpected vulnerability. "Will you bring Noah? He gets anxious when we're separated." The request, simple domestic trusting, affected Gareth more deeply than any corporate power play or financial strategy. "Of course." Later, as midnight approached in Emmy's hospital room, a strange peace descended on the unlikely gathering. Camille slept fitfully, IV fluids dripping steadily beside her bed. Noah had constructed a nest of blankets in a nearby recliner, finally succumbing to sleep with the resilience of childhood. Maeve maintained her vigil in a chair pulled close to Emmy's bed, occasionally stroking her daughter's hair or adjusting her blankets with tender precision. Gareth worked quietly at a small table in the corner, organizing documents and preparing his presentation for the morning's confrontation. The soft sounds of his papers shuffling mingled with the steady beep of Emmy's heart monitor, corporate machinations and human vulnerability occupying the same space, inseparable now in Gareth's mind. "You should rest," Maeve said softly, breaking the companionable silence. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Gareth looked up, noting the exhaustion etched in her features, despite her own refusal to sleep. "So should you." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I've had years of practice functioning without sleep, one of the many skills you develop when you're raising children alone while working multiple jobs." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity or accusation, highlighted the vast difference in their lived experiences. Gareth had never wanted for anything material. His struggles had been ones of purpose and principle, not survival. "I wish I'd known," he said finally. "About Westridge, about what was happening there. Maybe I could have—" "You didn't know because you weren't meant to know," Maeve interrupted gently. "That was the point of all those cover-ups, all those NDAs, to ensure that heirs like you could inherit clean hands along with dirty money." The assessment was harsh but fair. Gareth nodded, acknowledging its truth. "That ends tomorrow." "At what cost?" Maeve asked, genuine concern replacing her usual guardedness. "You're risking everything, your position, your inheritance, your reputation." "Some things matter more," Gareth replied simply, his gaze moving to Emmy's sleeping form. "Some truths need to be told regardless of the consequences." Maeve recognized her own words from days earlier, offered back to her now as a promise. Something shifted in her expression, the last wall of distrust finally crumbling. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for Emmy or for what you're doing tomorrow, but for proving that people can change, that systems can change." The moment stretched between them, fragile and profound. In another life, another reality, Gareth might have crossed the room, might have taken her hand, or brushed the hair from her forehead. But boundaries remained, not just of circumstance or history, but of appropriateness. This was not a time for personal connections, not when Emmy lay ill, and a corporate reckoning loomed hours away. Instead, he simply nodded, acknowledging the weight of her words. "Get some rest if you can, I'll keep watch." As night deepened outside the hospital windows, Gareth continued his preparations, but his thoughts kept returning to the slumbering family across the room, to Noah's innocent belief that pictures could make sad things better, to Emmy's fever-bright smile when she'd spotted him in the doorway earlier, to Maeve's fierce dignity even in her most vulnerable moments. Whatever happened tomorrow in the Blackwood Industries boardroom, Gareth knew with bone-deep certainty that his life had irreversibly changed the moment he'd stopped his car in a rainstorm. Not because of documents discovered or conspiracies unveiled, but because he had finally found something worth fighting for beyond the shadow of his father's legacy. Dawn was just breaking when Leander called, his voice tense with urgency. "Gareth, where are you? The board meeting has been moved up to 7:30. What, why? Gareth checked his watch. Barely 6 a.m. "Hargrove is making his move," Leander explained grimly. "He's gathered enough proxy votes to potentially block. We need to get there now if we're going to counter him." As Gareth ended the call, he found Maeve watching him, fully alert despite the night's vigil. "Go," she said simply. "We'll be fine here." Gareth hesitated, torn between the corporate battlefield awaiting him and the hospital room that had become improbably a sanctuary of sorts. "I'll send Morris with the car for you as soon as Emmy's released," he promised. "The mansion is yours, for as long as you need it." "Gareth," Maeve called softly as he gathered the portfolio. Remember why you're doing this. Not for revenge, not even for justice, really. For transformation, Gareth finished, understanding her meaning perfectly. For the future. Their eyes met in a moment of perfect accord, allies no longer by circumstance, but by choice, bound by a shared vision of what might yet be possible. As Gareth stepped into the corridor, straightening his tie and summoning the authority that was his birthright, he carried with him not just evidence of past wrongs, but the weight of responsibility to countless lives affected by his family's choices. And for the first time in his life, that weight felt not like a burden, but like purpose. The Blackwood Industries boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the corporate headquarters, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city below. As Gareth strode through the double doors at precisely 7:25 a.m., the assembled board members fell silent, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Victor Hargrove sat at the head of the massive oak table, Gareth's father's old position, flanked by the company's most senior executives. His smile was thin and predatory as Gareth approached. "Ah, Gareth, we were beginning to wonder if you would join us." "You mean after you deliberately rescheduled the meeting with minimal notice?" Gareth replied pleasantly, setting his leather portfolio on the table. A creative tactic, Victor, but ultimately ineffective. Leander entered behind him, carrying additional folders that they had prepared during the night. The attorney's presence clearly unsettled several board members, who exchanged uneasy glances. "Mr. Walsh," Hargrove acknowledged coldly, "this is a closed board meeting. Outside counsel was not invited." "Mr. Walsh is here at my request," Gareth stated, taking the chair directly opposite Hargrove. "As controlling shareholder of Blackwood Industries, I'm entitled to legal representation at any company proceeding." A murmur rippled through the room at Gareth's explicit mention of his controlling interest, a power he had rarely wielded so overtly. "Very well," Hargrove conceded, his facade of congeniality slipping slightly. "Let's proceed. The board has convened this emergency session to address serious concerns about the future leadership of Blackwood Industries." He gestured to a stern-looking woman at his right. "Ms. Chambers will outline the specific issues." Eleanor Chambers, the company's chief financial officer and one of his father's oldest allies, rose with practiced precision. "Over the past week, Mr. Blackwood has engaged in a pattern of concerning behavior that calls into question his readiness to assume full leadership responsibilities." The projector flickered to life, displaying a timeline of Gareth's recent activities. His absence from meetings, his unusual document request surveillance photos of Maeve entering and leaving the mansion. Most troubling, Chambers continued, her voice clinically detached. "Mr. Blackwood has been sharing confidential corporate information with Maeve Donovan, a former employee who attempted to bring damaging and baseless allegations against the company. 3 years ago." Gareth listened without interruption, noting which board members appeared uncomfortable with the presentation and which seemed to be in Hargrove's camp. The division was not as lopsided as he had feared. In light of these actions, Chambers concluded, "We recommend extending Mr. Hargrove's tenure as interim CEO for an additional 2 years, with Mr. Blackwood remaining as a non-executive director, until he has demonstrated more appropriate judgment." The boardroom fell silent as all eyes turned to Gareth. The coup attempt was now in plain view, not just a delay of his ascension, but a functional stripping of his authority while maintaining the appearance of respecting his position as Charles Blackwood's heir. "Thank you, Ms. Chambers, for that illuminating presentation," Gareth said, rising slowly from his chair. "It's clarified a great many things for me." He opened his portfolio, extracting a single document which he placed on the table before him. "Before we discuss your recommendation, however, I'd like to make a brief presentation of my own." Gareth's voice remained calm, but a new authority colored his tone, not the inherited power of the Blackwood name, but something earned through his own moral reckoning. "Specifically, I'd like to address why Ms. Donovan's allegations were not in fact baseless." Hargrove's composure slipped further. "This is not the forum for relitigating settled matters." "On the contrary," Gareth countered, "this is precisely the forum for addressing fundamental issues of corporate governance and ethical responsibility." He turned to face the board members directly. Each of you has a fiduciary duty not just to shareholders but to the company's long-term sustainability. What I'm about to share directly impacts that sustainability. For the next 30 minutes, Gareth methodically presented the evidence he and Maeve had uncovered. The falsified environmental reports, the surveillance of critics, the coordinated legal attacks against whistleblowers. He was careful not to overwhelm with details, focusing instead on the pattern of systemic corruption that had become embedded in the company's operations. The Westridge facility was not an isolated incident, Gareth explained, displaying internal memos that linked similar practices to 3 other Blackwood plants. It was part of a deliberate strategy to prioritize profit over safety, over health, over basic human decency. Several board members appeared visibly shaken. Patricia Winters, who had joined the board only last year, removed her glasses with trembling fingers. "Are you saying these documents were deliberately withheld during discovery in the class action suits?" She asked, her legal background bringing immediate focus to the implications. "Yes," Gareth confirmed simply, "under the direction of senior ICOA management." All eyes turned to Hargrove, whose face had gone rigid with controlled fury. "These are serious allegations," he said, voice dangerously soft, "based on documents of questionable provenance and the testimony of a disgruntled ex-employee with an obvious vendetta." "The documents bear the corporate seal and my father's signature," Gareth replied evenly. "As for Ms. Donovan's credibility—" He paused, steel entering his voice. "Her daughter is currently hospitalized with symptoms consistent with chemical exposure from the Westridge facility. She is one of dozens of children suffering similar effects. Effects our company not only caused but actively concealed." A heavy silence descended on the boardroom. Outside, morning sunlight glinted off neighboring skyscrapers, the city awakening to a day that would fundamentally alter one of its oldest corporate institutions. "What exactly are you proposing, Gareth?" asked Richard Torres, one of the more independent-minded directors. "A complete restructuring," Gareth replied without hesitation, "beginning with the immediate removal of Victor Hargrove and any executives involved in the Westridge cover-up." Hargrove laughed, the sound brittle and forced. "You can't possibly have the votes for that. The board serves at the pleasure of the controlling shareholder," Gareth interrupted, sliding another document across the table, "which, as this clearly states, is me. My father left me 52% of voting shares. I've allowed the board operational autonomy until now out of respect for established governance. That ends today." "You'd destroy your father's legacy," Hargrove demanded, abandoning pretense entirely. "Everything he built." "I'm not destroying his legacy," Gareth corrected quietly. "I'm redefining it, creating something he should have built in the first place. A company that measures success not just in profit margins but in human terms." Gareth turned to address the full board again, his vision for the company's future taking shape with each word. "Effective immediately, Blackwood Industries will establish a comprehensive health fund for all families affected by our environmental negligence. We will dedicate resources to genuine remediation of contaminated sites. We will institute true, independent oversight of all manufacturing facilities." He paused, measuring the impact of his words. "And we will do all this not under the shadow of legal coercion, but voluntarily as a first step toward becoming the company we should have been all along." The bold vision hung in the air, challenging decades of corporate culture in a single stroke. Several board members appeared stunned, others thoughtful. A few, Hargrove's closest allies, looked openly mutinous. "This is corporate suicide," Chambers declared. "The costs alone would devastate our quarterly projections." "We have more than adequate reserves," Gareth countered. "Funds that were designated for fighting the very people we harmed. We'll use that money to heal instead of harm." "The shareholders will revolt," predicted another director. "Some might," Gareth acknowledged, "those focused solely on short-term returns. But others will recognize what I've come to see, that true sustainability requires ethical foundation. Companies built on corruption eventually collapse under their own rot." As the debate intensified, Gareth remained steady, countering each objection with clarity and conviction. This was not the tentative heir apparent seeking approval, but a leader charting a new course with absolute certainty of its moral necessity. "I move that we put Gareth's proposal to a formal vote," Torres said finally, the first board member to publicly align with the new vision. "Seconded," added Winters, her earlier shock transformed to resolute support. Hargrove's face had gone ashen as he watched his carefully constructed authority crumble. "This is premature," he insisted. "We need time to evaluate financial implications, legal exposure." "I believe we've had quite enough time for evaluations and assessments," Gareth interrupted, his patience finally exhausting. "Years, in fact, while children got sick, while families lost their homes fighting legal battles they couldn't win, while communities drank contaminated water." The stark reality laid bare in the rarefied air of the boardroom seemed to shift something fundamental in the atmosphere. Even directors who had entered allied with Hargrove appeared to be reconsidering their positions. "The vote," Gareth said with quiet authority, "will proceed now." 40 minutes later, Gareth stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city. Below, his board members filed out in various states of shock concern or grudging acceptance. The restructuring had been approved, not unanimously but by a significant margin, once it became clear that Gareth was prepared to exercise his controlling interest if necessary. Hargrove was the last to leave, pausing at the doorway with cold fury etched in every line of his face. "You've won this round," he acknowledged, his voice barely above a whisper. "But this isn't over. Charles had powerful friends, Gareth, people who benefited from the old ways of doing business. They won't simply fade away because you've had a moral epiphany." "I expect resistance," Gareth replied calmly. "I'd be disappointed if there wasn't any." Something dangerous flickered in Hargrove's eyes. "You think this is a game? Lives are built on what you're dismantling. Not just mine, but hundreds of people who've dedicated their careers to this company." "No one is losing their job," Gareth corrected, "except those who knowingly participated in illegal activities. The company isn't being dismantled. It's being reformed." "Semantics," Hargrove spat. "You're Charles Blackwood's son in name only. He would be ashamed of what you've done today." The accusation, clearly meant to wound, slid off Gareth with surprising ease. "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "but I can live with his disappointment. I couldn't live with perpetuating his mistakes." After Hargrove departed, Leander approached with a mixture of admiration and concern. "That was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it in corporate governance." "It's just the beginning," Gareth replied, gathering his documents. "The real work starts now." "Where are you going?" Leander asked as Gareth moved toward the door. "There are press releases to draft transition teams to organize legal statements to prepare, and I'll address all of that," Gareth assured him, "after I check on Emmy. Some priorities transcend corporate protocols, Leander." Understanding dawned in the attorney's eyes. "Of course, give Maeve my best." Outside, the spring morning had blossomed into perfection. Blue skies, gentle breezes carrying the scent of newly bloomed flowers from the nearby park. As Morris drove him toward the hospital, Gareth felt a curious lightness, despite the enormous challenges ahead. For the first time in his adult life, his path was clear. Not the path prescribed by heritage or expectation, but one chosen with full awareness of its difficulties and its rightness. His phone rang, displaying Maeve's number. He answered immediately, heart quickening with concern. "How is she?" he asked without preamble. "Better," Maeve replied, relief evident in her voice. "The fever's broken. Dr. Chen says we can take her home this afternoon, though he wants to run more tests next week." "That's wonderful news," Gareth said, genuine joy coloring his tone. "I'm on my way there now." There was a brief hesitation on the line. "How did the board meeting go?" "It went as it needed to," Gareth answered simply. "We can discuss details later." Another pause, longer this time. "Thank you," Maeve said finally, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, "for everything." The simple gratitude from a woman who had every reason to despise his family name affected Gareth more deeply than the morning's corporate victory. "I should be thanking you," he replied, "for opening my eyes." As he ended the call, Gareth gazed out at the city passing by, the city his family had helped build for better and worse. The Blackwood name adorned buildings, parks, a hospital wing. For generations it had been synonymous with power and prosperity. Now it would stand for something more, something better, a legacy rewritten not through denial of past sins, but through the harder, braver work of genuine atonement. The media. Storm broke with predictable fury. By evening, Gareth's confrontation with the board had leaked to major news outlets, along with tantalizing hints of the environmental scandal that had precipitated it. Business analysts debated the company's future on financial news channels, while environmental activists staged impromptu celebrations outside Blackwood headquarters. Gareth watched it unfold from the relative sanctuary of his home study, where he had established a command center of sorts. Leander managed a rotating team of attorneys, PR specialists, and corporate governance experts, all working to implement the radical changes approved that morning. "The stock has dropped 12%, Leander reported, muting the television, where a stern-faced commentator was speculating about class action lawsuits. "Less than worst-case projections, actually." "It will recover," Gareth replied with quiet confidence. "Once the market understands that we're creating sustainable value, not just managing short-term exposure." A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Maeve and the children have returned from the hospital, sir. I've settled them in the East Wing as instructed." "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. Please ensure they have everything they need." Gareth hesitated, then added, "And perhaps some of those chocolate chip cookies the children enjoyed. Emmy might appreciate something familiar after the hospital." A hint of approval softened the housekeeper's features. "Already in the oven, sir." After she departed, Leander raised an eyebrow. "They're staying still even with everything that's happening." "Especially with everything that's happening," Gareth corrected. "Emmy needs rest and monitoring. The mansion is secure, comfortable, and away from the media circus that's likely to engulf. Maeve wants her connection to all this becomes public knowledge." Leander studied his friend, with the careful assessment of someone who had known him since childhood. "And that's the only reason, their comfort and security." Gareth met his gaze directly. "What are you suggesting, Leander?" "I'm not suggesting anything," the attorney replied mildly. "I'm observing that you've undergone a rather remarkable transformation since meeting Ms. Donovan. One might wonder if there are personal factors at play beyond corporate reform and social justice." Before Gareth could respond, his phone rang, Victor Hargrove's name flashing on the screen with almost sinister timing. He answered with caution, putting the call on speaker for Leander's benefit. "Victor, I didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "I'll be brief." Hargrove's voice was controlled, dangerous in its calm. "You've made a catastrophic mistake, Gareth, one that affects more people than you realize." "If you're calling to threaten me." "Not a threat," Hargrove interrupted. "A reality check. The board meeting was just the opening move in a game you don't fully understand. Did you really think your father operated without insurance policies? Contingency plans?" Something cold settled in Gareth's stomach. "Explain." "Check your email," Hargrove said simply and disconnected. The message waited in Gareth's inbox, no subject line, just an attachment. When opened, it revealed a comprehensive dossier on Maeve, her employment history, financial records, even medical information. Most disturbing were surveillance photos spanning years, including recent images of Noah and Emmy playing in a park near their former apartment. "My God," Leander whispered, scrolling through the document. "This goes well beyond corporate security protocols. This is stalking, invasion of privacy, potentially criminal surveillance." "This is a warning," Gareth concluded, grimly. "Hargrove's way of letting me know that he can get to Maeve and the children if he chooses." "We need to contact the authorities," Leander insisted, reaching for his phone. "Not yet," Gareth cautioned. "This email isn't explicitly threatening. It's carefully designed to intimidate without crossing legal lines. And we don't know what other insurance policies my father or Hargrove might have in place." A movement in the doorway caught his attention. Maeve stood there, pale but composed, clearly having heard enough to understand the situation. "How long has he been watching us?" Maeve asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Gareth stood immediately. "Maeve, I'm so sorry. We were going to—" "Show me," she interrupted, approaching the desk with determined steps. "I want to see everything." Leander glanced at Gareth, who nodded, turning the laptop so Maeve could view the contents of Hargrove's email. She scrolled through the documents with remarkable composure, her expression hardening only when she reached the photos of her children. "This one," she said, pointing to an image of Noah on a playground swing, "was taken 3 weeks ago, and this," she indicated another of Emmy waiting outside her preschool, "was just days before the rainstorm, before we came here." The implication hung heavily in the air. The surveillance had been ongoing, not just a reaction to her presence in Gareth's home. "They've never stopped watching me," Maeve said quietly, a realization rather than a question. "All these years, even after they took everything, they've been monitoring me, my children." "It appears so," Gareth confirmed grimly. "I had no idea the surveillance had continued after the legal settlement." Maeve straightened, something fierce and protective replacing the momentary vulnerability in her expression. "This changes nothing," she stated firmly. "If Hargrove thinks this will silence me, he's wrong. I've lived with fear for 3 years. I won't live with it anymore." Her courage, raw and unflinching in the face of such violation, struck Gareth with powerful force. Here was strength that had nothing to do with wealth or position, strength forged through adversity rather than inherited privilege. "We'll increase security here immediately," he assured her. "And I'll speak with Chief Reynolds about police protection when you and the children leave the property." "And the documents?" Maeve asked, her focus returning to their larger purpose. "The evidence about Westridge already secured," Leander replied. "We've established digital backups in multiple locations, plus hard copies with trusted sources. If anything happens to the originals or to us, the information still goes public." A ghost of a smile touched Maeve's lips. "You've thought of everything." "We're trying," Gareth said, moving around the desk to stand closer to her. "But Hargrove won't give up easily. There may be other surprises, other tactics we haven't anticipated." "I know," Maeve acknowledged, her expression solemn. "But for the first time since Simon died, I feel like we might actually win. That all of this," she gestured vaguely encompassing, "not just the surveillance but the years of struggle, might actually mean something in the end." The moment was interrupted by Noah appearing in the doorway, his small face pinched with concern. "Mom, Emmy's asking for you. She says her head hurts again." Maternal instinct immediately superseded all other considerations. Maeve cast one last glance at the disturbing images on the screen, then turned to her son with forced cheerfulness. "I'll be right there, sweetheart. Why don't you go tell her I'm coming with her special medicine?" After Noah scampered away, Maeve turned back to Gareth, her expression resolute. "We need to move quickly. Whatever Hargrove is planning, he won't wait long." "Agreed," Gareth said. "Leander is preparing the official disclosure package for the regulatory authorities. It will be delivered tomorrow morning." "And the public announcement, press conference scheduled for noon," Gareth confirmed. "Full disclosure of the Westridge, situation announcement of the Victim Compensation Fund, and the corporate restructuring plan." Maeve nodded approval and something else, perhaps pride, flickering in her eyes. "Good. It needs to be too big, too public for them to contain." She hesitated, then added softly, "Please be careful, Gareth. Men like Hargrove don't lose gracefully." After she left to tend to Emmy, Leander gave Gareth a meaningful look. "She's right, you know. This is the most dangerous phase, when Hargrove realizes he can't win through conventional means." "I know," Gareth replied, turning back to the window where darkness had begun to fall over the estate grounds. "That's why I've asked Morris to reach out to his former military contacts for additional security, and why I've prepared a contingency plan of my own." Outside, raindrops began to patter against the glass, a gentle echo of the storm that had first brought Maeve and her children to his door. As night descended, Gareth couldn't shake the feeling that another storm was gathering. One that would test everything they had built together in these tumultuous days. Morning arrived with the bustling energy of impending change. The mansion had transformed overnight into a command center, security personnel patrolling the grounds, legal advisors conferring in the library, media specialists preparing statements in the dining room. At the center of it all, Gareth moved with focused intensity, coordinating efforts across multiple fronts. "Regulatory filing is complete," Leander reported, ending a call with their legal team. Securities Commission, Environmental Protection Agency, state authorities, all notified simultaneously, with complete documentation. Hargrove can't bury this now. And the press, Gareth asked, reviewing talking points for the upcoming conference. Major outlets confirmed. Business networks, environmental reporters, local stations, they'll all be there. Leander checked his watch. 3 hours until showtime. Gareth nodded, an underlying tension evident beneath his composed exterior. Any word from our sources at headquarters? Hargrove called an emergency executive meeting first thing this morning. Closed door, no minutes, key lieutenants only. Leander's expression darkened. They're planning something, Gareth, we just don't know what. A soft knock at the study door interrupted them. Maeve entered, looking more rested than she had in days. She wore a simple blue dress, borrowed from Mrs. Sullivan's niece, Gareth suspected. Her hair pulled back in a practical knot that somehow enhanced, rather than diminished, her natural elegance. The children are with Mrs. Sullivan making cookies. Again, she explained, smiling faintly. Emmy's feeling much better this morning. That's wonderful news, Gareth said sincerely. Dr. Chen's office called earlier with some preliminary test results. They want to schedule a follow-up appointment next week. Maeve nodded, then gestured to the activity around them. Everything is happening so quickly now. Too quickly for second thoughts, Gareth asked, studying her carefully. No, she replied without hesitation. But I've been thinking about what happens after. For the children. For me. She took a deep breath. I want to be at the press conference today. The request caught Gareth off guard. Are you sure your identity could still be protected? The compensation fund, the medical program, none of that requires your public involvement. This isn't about compensation, Maeve said firmly. It's about truth. About standing in the light. After years in shadow. Her eyes met his with unwavering resolve. I need to be there, Gareth, not just for myself but for Simon. For every family that suffered while being told their pain wasn't real. Something in her quiet determination made argument impossible. Gareth simply nodded. Of course, if that's what you want. There's something else, Maeve continued, her voice taking on a new timbre of urgency. Something I discovered last night. Looking through the surveillance files Hargrove sent. She produced a folded paper from her pocket, spreading it on the desk between them. It was a printout of an email chain, partially redacted, but still legible. A conversation between Charles Blackwood and Victor Hargrove, dated 2 days before Simon Donovan's fatal accident. Need to discuss SD situation, becoming untenable, traditional approaches exhausted. Require permanent resolution before quarterly disclosure. Hargrove's response was equally cryptic but chilling. Resources in place. Will proceed at first viable opportunity. Plausible deniability assured. No connection to company or principals can be established. Gareth read the exchange, twice the blood draining from his face as the implication became undeniable. This is my father, authorized. We can't prove it conclusively, Maeve said, her voice remarkably steady. But the timing, the context, it's enough. Gareth stated, moral certainty hardening his voice. More than enough. He looked up at Leander, who had gone pale. Add this to the disclosure package. All of it. My father's involvement, Hargrove's. Roll everything. Gareth, Leander cautioned, this goes beyond corporate malfeasance. If what this suggests is true, then it's murder, Gareth finished grimly. And I won't protect anyone responsible, least of all my father's memory. The weight of this final betrayal, not just of laws or ethics but of basic humanity, seemed to physically alter Gareth. His shoulders straightened, his jaw set with a resolve that transcended personal cost or consequence. Are you absolutely certain? Maeve asked softly. This will destroy your father's legacy completely. There will be no coming back from this. Some legacies deserve to be destroyed, Gareth replied, meeting her gaze directly. And new ones built in their place. The moment was interrupted by Morris bursting into the study, his typically composed demeanor replaced by urgent alarm. Sir, there's a situation at the front gate. Security has detained a man attempting to enter the property. He had these on him. Morris placed a small flash drive and a folded document on the desk. He claims Hargrove sent him. The document was a court order, apparently authorizing seizure of evidence relevant to ongoing corporate litigation. The language was deliberately vague, the judicial signature suspiciously convenient. "It's fake," Leander declared after careful examination. "A convincing forgery, but definitely not legitimate. The judge whose name is on this is currently in Europe." "And the flash drive?" Gareth asked, eyeing it warily. "Unknown, sir," Morris replied. "Security thought it best not to access it without proper protocols." Leander pulled a standalone laptop from his briefcase, one with no connection to any networks. "Let's see what Hargrove was so eager to plant in your home." The drive contained a single video file. When played, it showed Gareth and Maeve in the garden 3 days earlier, their conversation about exposing Blackwood Industries captured with crystal clarity. But as the video continued, it became apparent that it had been expertly edited, specific phrases isolated and rearranged to create a damning narrative. In this manipulated version, Gareth appeared to be coaching Maeve on what to say about Westridge, suggesting they could create evidence and force the board's hand to achieve a lucrative settlement. "Unbelievable," Leander muttered, pausing. "The video. They've created a complete fabrication designed to make this look like extortion, you and Maeve conspiring to defraud the company." "The perfect counter-narrative," Gareth observed grimly. "If this had been discovered in my home, with that fraudulent court order providing a veneer of legitimacy, it would have poisoned everything," Maeve finished. "Cast doubt on all our evidence, painted us as opportunists rather than whistleblowers." "Hargrove's getting desperate," Leander concluded. "This is sloppy high risk. He must realize he's running out of options." Gareth checked his watch. Less than 2 hours until the press conference that would irreversibly change Blackwood Industries and his family's legacy, which makes him more dangerous than ever. A sudden commotion from downstairs interrupted their conversation, children's voices raised in excitement followed by Mrs. Sullivan's startled exclamation. Before anyone could investigate, Emmy burst into the study, her small face flushed with excitement. Mom, come quick, it's on TV." The group hurried to the mansion's main living room, where Noah stood transfixed before the large television. On screen, Victor Hargrove stood at a podium emblazoned with the Blackwood Industries logo, addressing a hastily assembled press corps. "Regrettable but necessary action," he was saying, his expression a masterpiece of somber concern. "As interim CEO, I cannot stand by, while the company's future is jeopardized by impulsive and ill-considered decisions." The camera panned to show the Blackwood board members seated behind him, not all of them, Gareth noted, but enough to create the impression of unified leadership. Therefore, effective immediately, the board has voted to invoke the incapacity clause in our corporate charter, temporarily relieving Gareth Blackwood of his decision-making authority, pending a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. "He can't do that," Leander sputtered. "That clause requires a supermajority vote medical documentation." "Shh!" Maeve urged, her attention fixed on the screen, where Hargrove continued with practiced gravity. "This action was not taken lightly," Hargrove assured the assembled reporters. "But Mr. Blackwood's recent behavior, including bringing a former disgruntled employee into his home and allowing her access to confidential corporate documents, has raised serious concerns about his judgment and stability." The camera cut to a reporter's question. "Are you referring to Maeve Donovan, who previously raised safety concerns about the Westridge facility?" Hargrove's expression shifted to practiced compassion. "Ms. Donovan has suffered tremendous personal hardships, many of which have unfortunately made her susceptible to conspiracy theories about this company. Gareth's decision to align himself with her narrative represents a troubling departure from rational business judgment." "He's spinning everything," Gareth observed, his voice quiet but intense, "getting ahead of our press conference, casting doubt on whatever we might reveal." "What does this mean for your investigation into the Westridge plant?" another reporter asked. Hargrove's answer was smooth-rehearsed. "Blackwood Industries has always maintained the highest environmental and safety standards. A routine internal review of historical operations is ongoing, but preliminary findings indicate full compliance with all applicable regulations." He smiled reassuringly. "We look forward to sharing those findings at the appropriate time once proper scientific and legal review is complete. "How's burying it?" Maeve whispered, anguish breaking through her composed exterior. "All of it. The evidence, the victims, everything, just like before." Gareth turned from the television, his expression not defeated but transformed, anger crystallizing into something more powerful, absolute clarity of purpose. "No," he said simply. "He's trying to bury it, but he's already lost." "How can you say that?" Maeve demanded, gesturing to the screen where Hargrove continued his masterful performance of corporate damage control. "He's discredited both of us before we could even speak." "Because he made a critical mistake," Gareth explained, a new energy animating his movements as he turned to Leander. "Call the network. Tell them we're moving up our press conference. I want to be on air in 30 minutes. 30 minutes, Leander protested. "But the preparations, the venue." "We don't need any of that now," Gareth interrupted. "Just cameras and the truth." He turned to Maeve, something like hope kindling in his eyes. "Hargrove thinks he's won because he's playing by the old rules, controlling the narrative, managing perceptions, burying uncomfortable truths beneath procedure and delay." "And how do we beat that?" Maeve asked, skepticism warring with a reluctant hope in her expression. "By changing the game entirely," Gareth replied. "No more corporate maneuvering, no more strategic disclosures, just complete, unvarnished truth, immediately, publicly, irrevocably." As Leander hurried to make the necessary arrangements, Gareth turned back to the television, where Hargrove was concluding his statement with practiced sincerity. "In times of transition, institutions must be protected from impulsive decisions, however well-intentioned," Hargrove declared solemnly. "Blackwood Industries will continue its proud tradition of excellence and community partnership under steady, experienced leadership." Gareth switched off the television, his expression resolute. "Ready a statement to the board," he instructed Leander, who had returned with confirmation from the network. "Effective immediately, I am exercising my authority, as controlling shareholder, to remove Victor Hargrove and his allies from all positions within Blackwood Industries." "On what grounds?" Leander asked, already typing. "Criminal conspiracy," Gareth stated flatly. "Obstruction of justice, environmental violations, and," he glanced at Maeve, receiving her slight nod of permission, "suspected involvement in the death of Simon Donovan." The boldness of the move hung in the air, not just corporate restructuring, but a complete dismantling of the power structure that had protected Blackwood Industries' darkest secrets for decades. "The network needs to know what you're planning." "To say," Leander said, his expression concerned but committed. "This will be live, Gareth. Once you start, there's no taking it back." "Good," Gareth replied simply. "Here's time for the Blackwood name to stand for transparency, not secrecy, for accountability, not evasion." As the makeshift media team transformed the mansion's entrance hall into an impromptu press area, Gareth turned to Maeve, who had been watching the preparations with quiet intensity. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "Your testimony, the documents, they're enough. You don't need to put yourself in the spotlight." Maeve considered this, her gaze drifting to where Noah and Emmy sat together on the staircase watching the unfolding activity with wide-eyed fascination. "Yes, I do," she replied finally. "Not just for the past, but for their future." She met his eyes with newfound resolve. "Some truths need witnesses, Gareth. I've been silent too long." As cameras were positioned and microphones tested, Gareth felt a strange calm settle over him. Not the practiced composure of the corporate air, but something deeper and more authentic. For the first time since inheriting his father's mantle, he knew with absolute certainty that he was acting not from obligation or expectation, but from his truest self. In 30 minutes, he would dismantle his father's legacy completely, and in doing so, perhaps begin to build his own. The morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Gareth's office, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden shafts of light. 3 weeks had passed since the press conference that had changed everything. 3 weeks of legal depositions, regulatory investigations, and a complete restructuring of Blackwood Industries' leadership and practices. Gareth stood at the window, watching groundskeepers tend to the estate gardens below. The mansion felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The public exposure of Blackwood Industries' environmental crimes had brought consequences both expected and surprising. The stock had plummeted initially, then stabilized as markets responded to the company's new transparency and commitment to remediation. Several executives had resigned, others faced potential criminal charges. The board had been reconstituted with independent directors focused on ethical governance rather than short-term profits. Most significantly, the Comprehensive Victim Compensation Fund had been established, with Maeve appointed to its oversight committee, a position that used her intimate knowledge of Westridge's impact to ensure fair treatment for affected families. A knock at the door interrupted Gareth's reflections. Leander entered looking more relaxed than he had in weeks, despite the mountain of work the revelations had created. "The first disbursements from the fund were approved this morning," he reported, handing Gareth a folder. "Medical coverage for 57 children, including comprehensive treatment for Emmy and Noah, housing assistance for 12 displaced families, environmental testing for 3 affected neighborhoods." Gareth reviewed the documents with a sense of satisfaction that transcended mere corporate accomplishment. "And Hargrove, the investigation continues," Leander replied, "but based on the evidence we provided, the prosecutor believes criminal charges are likely." The email exchange about Simon Donovan was particularly damning. The mention of Simon brought Gareth's thoughts back to Maeve. She had been extraordinary during the press conference, composed, articulate, unflinchingly honest about both her experiences and her determination to prevent others from suffering similar injustices. Standing beside her, Gareth had felt a curious pride that had nothing to do with his own role, and everything to do with witnessing her long-delayed vindication. "Have you spoken with her today?" Leander asked, his perceptiveness as sharp as ever. "Not yet," Gareth admitted. "She mentioned taking the children to their new apartment to finish settling in." The statement hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the subtle distance that had emerged since the immediate crisis had passed. With justice in progress and Emmy's health improving under proper treatment, Maeve had gently but firmly pursued her independence, finding an apartment in town and enrolling the children in new schools. "You know," Leander observed carefully, "the mansion has felt rather empty these past few days." Gareth smiled faintly. "Subtlety was never your strong suit, Leander." "Perhaps not," his friend conceded, "but observation certainly is. And I've observed 2 people who've experienced something extraordinary together, now awkwardly orbiting each other, like distant planets." Before Gareth could respond, his phone rang, Maeve's name lighting up the screen. He answered with perhaps too much eagerness, his composure momentarily forgotten. "Maeve, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she assured him. "Better than fine, actually. Emmy's latest tests came back. Dr. Chen says her numbers are improving, significantly. The treatment is working." The relief in her voice was palpable, vibrating with a joy too expansive to be contained. Gareth found himself smiling in response, though she couldn't see it. "That's wonderful news," he said sincerely. "Truly wonderful." A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken possibilities. "I was wondering," Maeve continued finally, "if you might like to join us for dinner tonight. Nothing fancy. Just a small celebration at our new place. The children miss Mrs. Sullivan's cookies, but I've managed a passable pizza." The invitation, simple, domestic, utterly ordinary, affected Gareth more deeply than he could have anticipated. After weeks of corporate restructuring and legal maneuvering, the prospect of shared meal and quiet conversation felt like a gift beyond measure. "I'd like that very much," he replied, surprised by the emotion coloring his tone. After they arranged the details and ended the call, Gareth turned to find Leander watching him with undisguised approval. "Don't," Gareth warned, though without heat. Leander raised his hands in mock surrender. "I didn't say a word." Later that evening, Gareth stood outside Maeve's new apartment building, a modest but well-maintained complex near the park. He carried a small potted orange tree, a reminder of the children's delight in the mansion's orangery, and a bouquet of lavender, having noticed Maeve's preference for its scent. Noah answered his knock, excitement evident in his rapid-fire greeting. "Gareth, Mom said you were coming. Did you bring Morris? Can we visit the mansion again sometime? Emmy learned a new piano song." Maeve appeared behind her son, gently urging him to let their guest enter. Noah breathed between sentences, remember. The apartment was small but thoughtfully arranged. Bookshelves lining one wall, a second-hand piano, against another Emmy's artwork, brightening every available surface. The scent of tomato sauce and baking dough filled the space with homey warmth. "It's not quite the Blackwood mansion," Maeve said with a self-deprecating smile as she accepted his gifts. "It's perfect," Gareth replied, meaning it. The space felt lived in, loved, everything his cavernous family home had never been. Dinner was a lively affair with the children dominating conversation, Noah describing his new school with elaborate detail, Emmy demonstrating her improving piano skills with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Watching Maeve with her children, her quiet pride, her instinctive understanding of their needs, Gareth felt a curious ache that had nothing to do with regret and everything to do with appreciation. After the meal, when the children had been tucked into bed with promises of another visit to the mansion's koi pond, Gareth and Maeve sat in companionable silence on her small balcony. The night was clear, stars emerging one by one above the city lights. "I received a letter today," Maeve said finally, "from Richards University. They've accepted me into their literature program for the fall semester." "Maeve, that's wonderful," Gareth exclaimed. "You're going back to finish your degree." She nodded, a mixture of pride and uncertainty in her expression. "Part-time while the children are in school. The settlement funds make it possible, and the flexible schedule means I can still oversee the compensation committee." "You'll be brilliant," Gareth said with absolute conviction. "The committee is already more effective because of your insights." Maeve smiled, acknowledging the compliment with characteristic grace. "And what about you? The board chairman of Blackwood Industries, now also its most vocal critic and reformer. That can't be an easy position." "It's not," Gareth admitted. "But it's the right one. The company needed transformation, not just cosmetic changes." "And your father's legacy?" Maeve asked softly. "I know exposing his involvement in Simon's death was difficult." Gareth considered this, watching the distant movement of traffic below. "I've realized that legacies aren't inherited, Maeve. They're built choice by choice." He turned to meet her gaze directly. "My father made his choices. I'm making mine." Something shifted in Maeve's expression. A softening, a recognition. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "We all are." The moment stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither was quite ready to name. The journey from that rainy night, Maeve and her children huddled on a sidewalk, Gareth offering shelter, with no understanding of what would follow, to this quiet evening had transformed them both in ways still unfolding. "I've been thinking about the future," Gareth said finally. "About what comes next?" "For Blackwood Industries." "For me," he clarified, "the company is on a better path now. The new leadership team is committed to the reforms we've put in place. My constant presence is becoming less necessary." Maeve studied him with gentle curiosity. "And that bothers you, not being essential?" "Actually, no," Gareth replied, surprising himself with the realization. "It feels right, like a natural evolution." He hesitated, then added, "I'm considering stepping back further, perhaps establishing a foundation focused on environmental remediation and corporate accountability." "That sounds meaningful," Maeve observed, "and very different from running Blackwood Industries." "It is," Gareth agreed, "less about preserving what exists, more about creating something new." He smiled slightly. "Something I've learned from you." "I think." The compliment hung in the air between them, sincere, unforced. Maeve's response was equally genuine. "We've learned from each other, I think." As the evening drew to a close, Gareth found himself reluctant to leave the small apartment, with its cramped balcony and mismatched furniture. It contained something his grand mansion, for all its opulence, had always lacked: the warmth of genuine connection of lives intertwined by choice rather than obligation. "Will you come to the children's school play next week?" Maeve asked as she walked him to the door. "Noah has 3 whole lines as the second tree from the left. He's been practicing constantly." "I wouldn't miss it," Gareth promised, the simple invitation meaning more to him than any corporate accolade or social honor. At the threshold, they paused, the moment suspended between what had been and what might yet be. Without overthinking, Gareth reached for her hand, gently enfolding it in his own. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Maeve's fingers tightened around his briefly. Acknowledgement, connection, possibility. "We changed things," she replied softly. "Together." As Gareth descended the apartment steps into the clear spring night, he felt an unfamiliar lightness, not the temporary relief of crisis averted, but the deeper peace of purpose discovered. Behind him lay the complicated legacy of the Blackwood, name with all its power and its shadow. Before him stretched a future undefined by inheritance or expectation, a future he was for the first time truly free to choose. The rain that had first brought Maeve and her children into his life had long since dried, leaving the world washed clean. And in that cleansing, Gareth had found not just redemption for his family's past sins, but the courage to define his own path forward. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest of choices. Stopping a car in a rainstorm, offering shelter to strangers, choosing truth over comfort. Each small decision building step by step into a new way of being in the world. As his car pulled away from the curb, Gareth glanced back at Maeve's window where a light still burned, a beacon of sorts marking not an ending, but a beginning. Whatever came next, they had proven that even the most entrenched systems could be changed, that courage and connection could triumph over power and deception. And that perhaps was the truest legacy of all, not what was inherited, but what was created. Not what was preserved, but what was transformed. A legacy written not in corporate records or family names, but in lives improved, wrongs righted, and futures reclaimed. Rain had brought them together, truth had bound them in common purpose. And now something new and unnamed was beginning to take root. Something that, like Emmy's precious orange trees, might yet bear the sweetest of fruit.